Hello everyone! Welcome to episode 11 of the Idle Game Maker CSS course. This episode is going to be all about tooltips and how to style them. Tooltips are the primary source of information explaining to the player how the mechanics of your game work. And that's the reason why styling them well using CSS is important. Let's get into it. In this video, we're giving our game's tooltips a complete visual overhaul. As shown in the before and after comparison, we'll be adding borders, aligning the images properly, and making several improvements to give them a cleaner, more polished look. First, I want to mention that in the handbook, it specifies that you can attach a class to a tooltip. After further testing, however, I found that attaching classes to tooltips is very buggy and doesn't seem to work as intended. And that's why I would recommend styling tooltips the way we are going to in this video, using specific classes that select each component of the tooltip individually. And these classes are as follows. First, we have the title class. And this class styles the title of the tooltip, which is usually the name of the building, upgrade, or achievement the tooltip is attached to. Next, we have the subtitle class. This styles the subtitles of the tooltip, which are small pieces of text right under the title that tell you additional information about the item. For example, their amount, the max amount you ever reached, and so on. The description class styles the description of the tooltip. Regarding what the description of a tooltip means or refers to, it selects the inner box of the tooltip which contains the description text. In the video, this inner box is highlighted. The costs class then styles the cost displayed in the top right corner of the tooltip, if the item has a cost, of course. This class is special, however, because it has two subclasses that can be used with it. First, we have the cost has enough class, and this applies a special style to the cost displayed in the top right corner of the tooltip when the player has enough resources to afford the item. This means that, for example, if the item is affordable, you could have the cost text turn a purple color instead of a green one. The cost not enough class is the same as the previous class, but applies the styling properties to the cost text only if the player doesn't have enough resources to afford the item. We then have the tooltip identifier, which styles the tooltip as a whole, but ignores its internal components, such as the title and subtitles. You will style the tooltip using this identifier when you want to modify the look of the tooltip itself. For example, when changing the background color, border, box shadow, and so on. You can then customize the icon of the tooltip using the tooltip identifier's thing icon subclass. Finally, we have a small but important component of the tooltip, and that is the little arrow that points to the item the tooltip belongs to. We will call it the tooltip point from now on. The tooltip point is surprisingly difficult to style due to the special way it was created by Ortail. And to be honest, so far I only figured out how to change its color. Because of this, I'll explain it later in the video as we go. And these are all the classes and identifiers, excluding the tooltip point, that you'll be using when styling the tooltip. And now, we are going to revamp our game's tooltips using what we have learned. Alright, so before we even begin, I want to make a quick template of all the classes and identifiers we'll be using to style our tooltips, which we have just learned about. So, I will definitely be styling the tooltip in my game, the subtitles in my game as well, so we're going to be using the subtitle class, probably the costs as well. And very quickly, let's just comment out this section in our code so that when we make any changes to it in the future, we will know that below this comment is the tooltip CSS for our game. Now I want to add the tooltip identifier because we will definitely be changing the tooltip window as well, especially its width and its border, its background color, etc. Next up, I will also be changing the icon of our tooltip. So we're going to be using the .thing icon subclass of the tooltip identifier, and I think that's pretty much it for now. Alright, so now we added those templates, we'll have a much easier time coding in the changes, and let's review how our tooltips look at the moment. So I can immediately see tooltips are a little bit too small actually, and the image is actually reaching out of the tooltip, so we will fix that later. But right now I want to focus on the tooltip window itself. So we will increase its width. I also want it to have a border just so that it looks a lot nicer. I will change its background color as well and likely give it an inner glow and an outer shadow using box shadows, right? Now to implement the changes we just discussed, we should be using the tooltip identifier because, as I explained earlier in the video, the tooltip identifier selects the tooltip window itself. So I think a width of 480 pixels would work just fine. I also wanted to have a border, as I mentioned, with a size of 2 pixels, a style of solid, and a color of pale goldenrod. This is just the color that a lot of elements inside of our game use, so it's just sticking with the theme of our game. Now, I also mentioned that I want my tooltip to have a box shadow, so let's quickly add one using the box shadow property. And what's cool about this property actually is that you can add multiple box shadows to a single element using this property. You just separate each shadow using a comma. So I'll show that in just a second, but I want the first box shadow to be sort of an inner glow of the tooltip, right? So we're going to specify that it is an inset box shadow. Next up, we're going to set the X and Y offset. So I want the X offset to be 0 pixels, the Y offset to also be 0 pixels. Now we're going to set the blur radius. Let's set it to be 6 pixels, and the spread radius I want to be 0 pixels. So I just don't want any spread of the inner glow. Next up, I'm once again going to make it a pale goldenrod color, and this is just so that it fits with the color of our borders. Now, as I mentioned just a second ago, we can add a new box shadow by separating it with a comma. So let's do just that. Again, we're going to set the X and Y offsets to, well, be 0, but this is going to be the actual shadow of the tooltip, so I want this shadow to be a lot larger. So we're going to have the blur radius be 18 pixels, the spread radius again be 0 pixels. This is essentially just the intensity, right? I don't want it to be any more intense than it already is. And now I'm also going to add the color of black, and this should add a nice shadow to our tooltip. Let's now save our changes and see how it looks in game. I think our tooltips are already looking quite a bit better with the border that they have now. However, I think what they are still missing is a different background color, so let's quickly add that as well. Alright, so I played around with the colors a little bit to see what kind of color would fit the best for the background of our tooltip, and I think that this one right here works pretty much the best. It's essentially a sort of really dark brown that really fits in well with the golden theme our game uses. It also has a 0.9 alpha channel value, which just makes it a little bit transparent. Here we can see how the background color of our tooltips really elevated them to look a lot nicer, and I think that they're already coming along pretty nice. Next up, I want to style the images of our tooltips so that they are more aligned, or well, inside the tooltip instead of poking out of it. And the way we do that is actually very simple, but first we need to understand why the images are poking out of the tooltips in the first place. Well, it's because Ortail added a margin to them. I'm not entirely sure why, but we can simply fix this by adding a simple margin 0 pixels property. Right, and with that one simple change, we can already see that the icons of our tooltips are properly aligned, and we could leave it like this, but what I think would elevate the tooltip icon even more is to add a yellow background to it to really just separate the icon from the other elements properly. So, in order to make our icons pop out even more from the tooltips, I want to add a background color to them. This is essentially just the pale goldenrod color, just in RGB form, and the reason I did this is because the RGBA value supports the alpha channel, which means we can make it transparent. I wanted it to be 50% transparent because I think that just looks a lot better. Next up, I want to add a border radius to the background of our tooltip icons. This is just so that they have rounded corners. Let's also add a glow to them using the box shadow property. So once again, I'm just gonna quickly skim over this. We're gonna make it all pale goldenrod color, and this is just so that they have a nice pale goldenrod colored glow. Okay, now that we saved our changes, hopefully you can see what I meant by making our icons pop out a lot more inside of our tooltips, right? We can now see that each icon essentially has its own designated little space inside of the tooltip, which I just think looks really, really cool. With that done, the next thing I want to focus on is the title of our tooltips, but also the subtitles, right? And I think they would look cool if they were centered and had a bit of a different color and maybe some glow, just to really make the title and the subtitle stand out from the rest of the tooltip, same way as the icon. And the way we do this is very simple. We simply add the text align property with a value of center. This should align it, well, to the center. Let's add it to the subtitle as well. And I mentioned that I want my title to have a different color, so as is the standard in this episode and in our game in general, let's give them a color of pale goldenrod. Let's also give them a slightly larger font size of 1 rem, and let's give them a slight subtle text glow or text shadow, which is going to have an X offset of 0 pixels, Y offset of 0 pixels, and a blur radius of 6 pixels with, once again, a color of pale goldenrod. Alright, and I think with this, our tooltips are nearly complete. We can see that the title looks much better, but I'm noticing an issue here, right? And we can see that the subtitle below the title is not centered with the title itself, right? It is most visible in the buildings here. And why is this? Well, it's because the title, in this case, especially in buildings and upgrades, responds to the position of the costs in the top right corner. The subtitle, however, doesn't need to respond to the position of the cost because it's not in the way. But how do we fix this? Well, it's sort of a clever workaround. The way we fix it is by adding a height of 48 pixels to the costs. Now, why would this ever fix our alignment issue? Well, since the costs will have a height of 48 pixels, it will reach the subtitles as well, and the subtitles will be forced to respond to the cost's position as well, same as with the title. Now, after we saved our changes, we can see that it really did fix our alignment issue and that now the subtitle is aligned in the center with the title. And again, what we just did is we simply increased the height of the costs, or well, the costs box, and that means the subtitle is now forced to dynamically respond to it in the same way as the title. But the last thing I want to change about my tooltips is the tooltip point, right? The arrow that points to the thing the tooltip is attached to. Because we can see that right now it is the default black color instead of matching with our border. So how do we go about changing the color of the tooltip point? Well, what is different here is that we cannot style the tooltip point using a single class or identifier, because the tooltip point has 4 different orientations depending on where it originates from. For example, when we are hovering over a building in our game, it is pointing left. But when we're hovering over an upgrade in our game, the tooltip point is pointing up. And that is one of the main reasons why styling the tooltip point is so difficult, because it actually has 4 different identifiers that select the tooltip point in the specified orientation. And these identifiers are as follows: the tooltip PD identifier, which stands for tooltip point down. Then we have the tooltip point up identifier, the tooltip point left identifier, and you guessed it, the tooltip point right identifier, right? Obviously all of them are shortened. The PR stands for point right, point left, point up, and point down. Behind the scenes, however, these arrows are made using a really clever CSS trick. Instead of using an image or a shape, they are created using borders on a tiny invisible box to draw the arrow. We can better understand this by looking at Idle Game Maker's default CSS, which can be found by inspecting any element in our game. For example, when the tooltip is above the element, the tooltip point needs to point down. So, Idle Game Maker's default CSS uses a transparent border on the left and right and a visible top border, which creates a little triangle that looks like it's pointing down. Each one of these borders has a width of 6 pixels. Essentially, here's the rule. The side of the tiny box that has the colored border is the base of the arrow. It needs to be the opposite side you want it to point. For example, if we wanted the tooltip point to point up, the base would need to be the bottom border. The borders adjacent to it are made transparent to essentially cut off the corners of the base border, which creates the arrow. And the border opposite the base border is then not defined at all. Another way to think about it is to imagine cutting a piece of paper into a triangle and pointing it in different directions. That's basically what is happening here, just with CSS borders. The base of the arrow is the paper, while the transparent borders are the pieces we cut off, which is exactly why they are transparent. And that is how the tooltip point is created in Idle Game Maker. With this knowledge, we can easily change the color of the tooltip point in all its 4 different orientations. So all we really need to do to change the color of the tooltip point based on its direction is to change the color of the base of the tooltip point based on the direction that it's pointing. So in the first identifier, it's pointing down, so the base should be the opposite direction that we want it to point. So we should choose the border top property, give it a size of 6 pixels, a style of solid, and a color of pale goldenrod. Now we just repeat this process for the remaining 3 identifiers. When the tooltip point is pointing up, we once again change the color of the border that is opposite the sided points, so that's the bottom border. We give it the same values and a color of pale goldenrod. When it's pointing left, we simply choose the right border, like so. Again, give it the same value, and when it's pointing right, we choose the left border, since that is our base. And once again, give it the pale goldenrod color. And with that, we successfully changed the color of our tooltip point in all orientations. For example, here when we hover over our building, it's pointing left and its color matches the color of our tooltip's border. It's colored when it points down and it's also colored when it points up. And with that, this video is finally coming to a close. It's been a bit of a longer episode, but we went quite in depth into how tooltips actually work in Idle Game Maker. I think at this point, our game is pretty much finished, and in the next video we are simply going to be ending the CSS course by uploading and updating our game into its CSS version on the .NET Forums Discord. And with that said, thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this tutorial, and if you did, make sure to like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.